Caffeine. It's in your coffee, your soda, your energy drink, and probably your bloodstream right now. Caffeine blocks a molecule called adenosine, the one that tells your brain it's tired. The result feels like energy, but it's actually your brain ignoring its own exhaustion signals rather than removing them. The tiredness is still there underneath, just muted, quietly building until the caffeine wears off and hits all at once. Do this daily for long enough, and your brain builds more adenosine receptors to compensate, trying to restore balance against the constant blocking. That's exactly why skipping one cup can turn into a splitting headache by noon. Your brain suddenly has far more open receptors than it knows what to do with, and blood vessels in the head swell in response, which is the actual physical cause of a caffeine withdrawal headache. Caffeine is the single most widely used psychoactive substance on Earth, consumed by roughly 90% of adults worldwide, and most of them have never once thought of it as a drug. Even the withdrawal symptoms, the headache, the fog, the irritability, tend to get blamed on stress or a bad night's sleep, rather than on the substance that's actually missing, which is exactly what makes caffeine one of the most invisible dependencies most people will ever develop, one they'll carry for decades without a single day of noticing it was there at all. Nicotine. Nicotine reaches the brain in about 10 seconds, faster than a drug injected straight into a vein. It floods the brain with dopamine and rewires reward pathways so efficiently that some researchers rank it among the hardest substances to quit, harder than alcohol, harder than cocaine, harder even than heroin by some measures of relapse rate. Part of what makes it so effective is timing. Every single puff delivers its own small hit, meaning a single cigarette can train the brain's reward circuit dozens of times in a matter of minutes, far more repetitions per session than almost any other drug allows. And, unlike most other substances on this list, it's sold at nearly every gas station, corner store, and vending machine on the planet. No prescription, no age verification beyond a glance at an ID. Vaping has only made the delivery faster and more discreet, letting that same 10-second dopamine hit happen in a classroom or an office without anyone noticing the smell. And newer devices have pushed nicotine concentrations higher than a traditional cigarette ever delivered, meaning a generation raised on vapes may be developing a stronger dependency faster than the generations before them ever did, often without ever having touched a single traditional cigarette in their life. Alcohol. Alcohol doesn't just relax you. It slows down communication between brain cells across the entire brain at once, rather than targeting one specific system the way most other drugs do. That's why judgment, memory, and coordination all fail together instead of one at a time. A wide, blunt effect rather than a precise one. Drink regularly over years, and the brain physically shrinks in areas tied to memory and decision-making, changes that show up on brain scans of people who never once considered themselves as having a problem, people with ordinary jobs and ordinary lives who simply had a drink or two most evenings. It remains one of the only drugs on this list where withdrawal in heavy long-term users can actually be fatal if stopped too abruptly without medical supervision, a danger that catches even experienced heavy drinkers off guard when they decide to quit cold turkey on their own, without realizing withdrawal itself can be more dangerous than the drinking ever was. It is legal in nearly every country on Earth, taxed, advertised during primetime television, and served at almost every major life event, from weddings to funerals, despite carrying a withdrawal risk profile that rivals some of the most tightly controlled substances that exist, a contradiction society has simply learned to live with rather than resolve. Sugar triggers the same dopamine reward circuit as nicotine and cocaine, just gentler and slower to build tolerance. Studies on rats show sugar can override addiction to actual drugs when both are offered side by side. Animals that had been conditioned to prefer cocaine switched their preference the moment sweetened water was introduced, a result that surprised the researchers who ran it. There's no controlled substance label on it anywhere, no age restriction, no warning sticker, and it's engineered into nearly everything on a grocery store shelf, often hidden under names that don't sound like sugar at all.
Dextrose, maltose, cane juice, dozens of labels for the same basic molecule. Some researchers argue the brain's response to intensely sweet, calorie-dense food evolved for a world of scarcity that no longer exists, leaving modern brains chasing a reward signal that food manufacturers have learned to trigger with surgical precision, engineering the exact ratio of sugar, fat, and salt that keeps a reward circuit firing long after the body has had enough calories. It is, by a wide margin, the most consumed psychoactive substance on this entire list, and the only one routinely given to children as a reward, handed out at birthday parties and report cards, long before anyone would consider giving a child any other substance on this list.
Cannabis. Where it's legal, cannabis is sold like a consumer product, displayed in clean dispensaries with detailed potency labels. But THC binds to receptors spread through nearly the entire brain, not just the ones tied to relaxation. That's why it can affect memory, appetite, motor coordination, and mood all in a single session, a broader footprint than most people assume from something sold over the counter. Teenage brains are especially sensitive since those receptor systems are still being built well into the mid-20s, and some longitudinal studies have linked heavy adolescent use to measurable drops in later cognitive testing. Modern strains are also far more potent than what was available decades ago, meaning the cultural memory of cannabis as a mild substance from decades past is increasingly out of date, while the packaging and marketing around it has never looked more like any other regulated consumer good on a shelf. Glossy boxes and clean typography doing a lot of work to make an increasingly potent drug feel routine. Edibles complicate this further, since the delayed onset means many first-time users take a second dose before the first has even started working, then find themselves far higher than they intended a full hour later. A timing gap responsible for a disproportionate share of cannabis-related emergency room visits tied to edibles specifically.
Nitrous oxide. Sold legally as a cooking ingredient inside whipped cream chargers, nitrous oxide cuts oxygen delivery to the brain for the seconds it's inhaled. That brief oxygen gap is what produces the euphoria and the ringing sound users describe, a genuine, if temporary, form of mild oxygen deprivation. Repeated use has been linked to nerve damage from vitamin B12 depletion, since nitrous oxide inactivates the form of B12 the body needs for healthy nerve function, a risk almost nobody associates with something sold next to the baking supplies. Emergency rooms in several countries have reported a sharp rise in nitrous-related nerve injuries among young adults in recent years, cases involving numbness, difficulty walking, and in severe instances, symptoms resembling multiple sclerosis, all from a product still sold legally in bulk canisters online, with no age restriction in most places, marketed openly for baking, despite most buyers never intending to bake anything at all. Some regions have started restricting bulk sales specifically in response, but the individual small canisters, the ones actually used recreationally, remain almost entirely unregulated in most parts of the world.
Kratom. Kratom leaves come from a tree native to Southeast Asia, and depending on the dose, they act like a stimulant or like an opioid, an unusual dual identity for a single plant. It binds to the same receptors as morphine, which is why some people use it to manage opioid withdrawal on their own without medical supervision, and why regulators in several countries have gone back and forth on whether to ban it entirely. In the United States, it remains legal at the federal level, even as individual states have banned it outright, creating a patchwork where the exact same product is a supplement in one state and a controlled substance one border over, sold as loose leaf, capsules, or brewed tea, depending entirely on which side of a state line the shop happens to sit. Because it's marketed as a natural botanical supplement rather than a drug, it often sits on gas station counters next to energy shots and breath mints, with none of the packaging suggesting it shares a receptor system with prescription painkillers, a resemblance most customers standing at that counter would never think to suspect.
Kava.
Pacific Islanders have used kava in ceremonies for centuries, and today it's sold in dedicated kava bars as a legal, hangover-free alternative to alcohol. It works on the same calming brain receptors as anti-anxiety medication, producing relaxation without the same next-morning fog or the loss of coordination alcohol brings. Heavy long-term use, though, has been tied to liver damage serious enough that some countries pulled it from shelves entirely before quietly allowing it back once researchers determined the risk was mostly linked to poor quality extraction methods rather than the plant itself. It remains a rare example of a substance banned, studied, and then reinstated within a matter of years, its reputation swinging from dangerous liver toxin back to relaxing bar drink almost as quickly as the headlines had first condemned it. Kava bars have since spread well beyond the Pacific Islands, popping up in cities that have never had any cultural connection to the plant at all, marketed simply as a legal, calming night out.
Salvia divinorum. Salvia is a plant, legal in many places, specifically because lawmakers didn't know it existed when most drug laws were originally written decades ago. It activates a receptor almost nothing else on this list touches, a kappa opioid receptor tied to perception in reality itself, producing intense but extremely short hallucinations, often under 10 minutes, that users describe as feeling like the fabric of reality is folding or peeling away. Because the effect is so brief and so intense, it has developed a reputation as one of the most disorienting legal substances that exists, and several countries have moved to restrict it, specifically after viral videos of users under its influence began circulating online, showing users briefly unable to recognize their own surroundings or the people filming them, footage that spread far faster than any warning label ever could. Unlike most substances on this list, its effects are gone almost as quickly as they arrive, which is exactly what makes it so easy to film and so hard to legislate against consistently. A drug whose entire public reputation was effectively built by teenagers with cameras rather than by scientists.
Diphenhydramine. Sold as a basic allergy pill in every pharmacy, diphenhydramine at high doses blocks a brain chemical involved in memory and attention so strongly that it has been used in decades-old psychiatric research specifically to simulate confusion and hallucination on purpose as a model for studying delirium. At normal doses, it just makes you drowsy, the reason it's stocked next to sleep aids. At high doses, users report vivid, often disturbing hallucinations that are difficult to distinguish from reality, sometimes including the sensation of interacting with people who aren't there. At normal doses, it's medicine. At high doses, the line between medicine and hallucinogen gets uncomfortably thin, and the same active ingredient in the same bottle sits on both sides of that line depending only on how many pills someone decides to take. It remains one of the most accessible substances on this entire list, sold without any purchase limit in most countries, sitting quietly in the allergy aisle beside products that look nearly identical on the shelf.
Dextromethorphan. DXM is the cough suppressant in most over-the-counter cold medicine, and at normal doses it does exactly that, quiet a cough, by acting on the brain's cough reflex center. At high doses, it acts on the same receptor system as ketamine, producing dissociative effects, a sense of detachment from your own body and surroundings that ranges from mild floatiness to a complete break from physical sensation. That dual identity, harmless medicine at low doses, dissociative drug at high ones, has made it one of the most commonly misused legal substances among teenagers, precisely because it's already sitting in the family medicine cabinet, requiring no dealer, no age check beyond store policy, and no prescription at all, just a short walk down the same aisle as the flu remedies and vitamins, the packaging itself giving no hint of the dissociative effects hiding at higher doses. Some pharmacies have started placing purchase limits on the highest concentration versions, specifically because of this pattern, quietly treating a cough medicine with some of the same shelf precautions once reserved for cold medicine used to manufacture other drugs entirely, without ever calling it what it functionally is. The spice sitting in your pumpkin pie contains a compound called myristicin, and in large enough amounts, it functions as a genuine hallucinogen. It takes hours to kick in, sometimes as long as 6,
and comes bundled with nausea and a pounding headache severe enough that almost no one who tries it attempts it a second time. For a stretch in American prison history, when access to other substances was tightly restricted, nutmeg was reportedly one of the only mind-altering options inmates could get their hands on through the kitchen, smuggled out in small paper packets. It remains completely unregulated, sitting on spice racks in every grocery store on the planet, priced at just a few dollars a jar, right between the cinnamon and the cloves, with absolutely nothing on the label hinting at what a large enough dose can actually do to a person's perception for the better part of a day, sold in the exact same size jar whether you're baking or not.
Absinthe. Absinthe was banned across much of Europe and the United States for nearly a century, blamed for hallucinations, seizures, and violent behavior in drinkers, largely because of thujone, a compound found in the wormwood used to make it. Modern toxicology testing on historical bottles found the actual thujone levels were far too low to cause any of those effects. The real culprit was simply very strong, badly regulated, often poorly distilled alcohol sold at a time before any quality standards existed. Once that research came out, absinthe was legalized again almost everywhere, and today it's sold as a standard, if strong, spirit. Its century-long reputation as a hallucinogen, essentially a myth built on bad science, one that took modern chemistry 100 years to finally correct. The bottles now sold under the same name are chemically barely comparable to what caused the original panic, yet the name itself still carries the old mystique into every bar that stocks it.
Betel nut. Chewed by an estimated 600 million people worldwide, mostly across South and Southeast Asia, betel nut delivers a stimulant hit through a compound called ericoline, which acts on the brain in a way strikingly similar to nicotine, producing alertness and a mild euphoria. It's sold openly on street corners, wrapped in leaves at roadside stalls, cheaper and more accessible in many regions than cigarettes. Even so, the World Health Organization classifies it as a known carcinogen, directly linked to oral cancers that are unusually common in the regions where chewing it is most culturally embedded. A legal, everyday habit, deeply woven into social and cultural life across an entire region, with a cancer risk profile most casual users have simply never been told about, wrapped and sold on the same street corner where you'd buy a snack. Public health campaigns in several countries have tried to curb its use for decades with limited success, in part because it's tied so tightly to tradition, celebration, and daily ritual, rather than being seen as a drug at all. Poppy seeds. The seeds scattered on your bagel come from the exact same plant species used to produce heroin, and trace amounts of morphine and codeine cling to the outer surface of the seeds after harvesting. Eat enough poppy seed bagels or poppy seed cake in a short window, and you can genuinely fail a workplace drug test, a phenomenon well documented enough that some laboratories have deliberately raised their detection thresholds specifically to account for it. Military and transportation safety testing standards in several countries include explicit guidance telling personnel to avoid poppy seed products before scheduled tests, an official acknowledgement that a common bakery ingredient sold with zero restriction anywhere can genuinely trigger a false positive for opioid use on a serious drug screening. There have even been documented court cases where a positive test was successfully explained away by nothing more than breakfast, a defense that sounds absurd until the lab data backs it up completely, turning a routine breakfast into legally admissible evidence in a drug case. Energy drink stimulant blends. Beyond the caffeine itself, most energy drinks add taurine and guarana, compounds that seem individually relatively harmless, but appear to amplify caffeine's effect on the nervous system when combined in the doses typically used. Guarana in particular contains its own natural caffeine, meaning a single can may deliver more stimulant load than the caffeine content listed on the label alone would suggest. Emergency room visits linked to energy drinks have climbed steadily for over a decade, with cardiac symptoms, irregular heartbeat, and anxiety attacks among the most common complaints. And the products remain almost entirely unregulated compared to actual prescription stimulant medication, sold without limit to anyone old enough to reach the cooler, often marketed directly towards teenagers through flavors and branding that look closer to soda than medicine. Some countries have since banned sales to minors specifically because of this pattern, while others still stock them directly beside children's juice boxes in the exact same refrigerated aisle, leaving the actual restriction almost entirely up to which country a buyer happens to live in.
CBD. CBD is marketed as the calm, legal cousin of THC, and unlike THC, it doesn't produce a psychoactive high. But it does alter brain signaling tied to anxiety, pain, and seizure activity, significant enough that it's the active ingredient in an FDA-approved epilepsy medication. In high doses, though, it has interacted dangerously with common prescription medications by changing how the liver's enzyme system processes them, sometimes causing those other drugs to build up to unsafe levels in the bloodstream, an interaction most CBD gummy or oil packaging never mentions anywhere on the label. It's sold in gas stations right next to candy, with none of the interaction warnings a pharmacist behind a counter would normally be legally required to give before handing it over, since gas station shelves and vending machines don't ask what other medications you happen to be taking. The wellness branding around it, soft pastel packaging, words like calm and balance, does a lot of work to make people forget it's interacting with their liver at all.
Melatonin isn't just a sleep aid you buy at the pharmacy. It's a hormone your own brain already produces naturally to control your internal clock and signal when it's time to sleep. Taking it as a supplement means introducing an external, unregulated dose of something your endocrine system is designed to regulate entirely on its own, based on light exposure and time of day. Independent lab testing of over-the-counter melatonin supplements has repeatedly found doses that vary wildly from what the label claims, sometimes by several 100% in either direction, meaning 2 bottles from 2 different brands, both labeled the same dose, can deliver wildly different actual amounts of hormone to the brain each night, without either consumer ever knowing it. Because it's classified as a supplement rather than a drug in most countries, it skips the kind of manufacturing oversight that would normally catch a discrepancy that large before the product ever reached a shelf, leaving consumers to essentially self-titrate a hormone dose using nothing more reliable than a number printed on a bottle.
Ashwagandha. Ashwagandha has exploded across supplement shelves and social media in recent years as a natural stress reliever, and clinical research does show it appears to lower cortisol, the brain's primary stress hormone, in a meaningful and measurable way. But it also affects thyroid hormone levels, sometimes pushing them higher in people who take it regularly, which is why a supplement marketed as purely calming has, in a small but growing number of documented cases, been linked to liver injury serious enough to require hospitalization. It's sold without a prescription, without dosage limits, and without the kind of monitoring a doctor would apply to any other substance that measurably alters hormone levels this significantly, sold instead in flavored gummies right next to the vitamin C. Social media has only accelerated its popularity, with millions of posts recommending daily doses that were never actually tested at that frequency in the original clinical research being justified to use them.
Ginseng. Ginseng has been used in traditional medicine for over 2,000 years as both a stimulant and a calming agent simultaneously, a contradiction modern research still hasn't fully explained despite decades of study. It appears to affect the same dopamine and serotonin systems targeted by prescription antidepressants and stimulant medications, influencing mood, energy, and focus through pathways doctors take very seriously when they show up in pharmaceutical form. Yet ginseng is sold over the counter in nearly every pharmacy and health food store on Earth, with none of the monitoring, blood testing, or dosage titration a psychiatric prescription targeting those same exact brain systems would legally require. closing out the list with the same theme running through every entry on it. Legal was never the same thing as harmless. 20 substances, all sitting on ordinary shelves, all quietly rewriting brain chemistry in ways most of the people buying them will never think to ask about.